Stockpiles of ammunition in Russia and Ukraine estimated. Stocks of ammunition and spare parts for S-300 air defense systems and Buk anti-aircraft missile systems, which the Ukrainian armed forces use to repel missile attacks from the armed forces of the Russian Federation, are depleting, and it is impossible to acquire new ones, writes the Financial Times. According to the representative of the Ukrainian Air Force, Colonel Yuri Ignat, on one Russian missile, the armed forces of Ukraine, as a rule, fire 2 missiles from the S-300 and Buk, in order to increase the likelihood of intercepting it with their obsolete systems. The purchase of additional missiles for the S-300 or Buk, which are produced in the Russian Federation, is impossible, the journalists of the publication shared their point of view. As noted in the publication, it was not easy to find additional available reserves on the world market, with the exception of the batch that was received earlier from the Slovak side. It is reported that the Ukrainian army received from the West 3 dozen Gepard SBAAGs, as well as several modern IRIST air defense systems and NASAMS anti-aircraft missile systems, while, according to Ignat, Kiev needs hundreds of appropriate weapons due to depletion of stocks. We have no other choice but to switch to these types of weapons, since the Soviet weapons of the 70s and 80s are outdated, and the enemy is depleting them every day, Ignat was quoted as saying. However, the publication indicates that the Russian side still has an extensive arsenal of ballistic missiles. The American newspaper The New York Times wondered how depleted the Russian arsenal could be after a large-scale attack on Ukraine's infrastructure. The imminent reduction of missiles in the reserves of the armed forces of the Russian Federation was previously discussed by Western politicians and officials in Kyiv. However, massive shelling continues. The publication gives 4 possible explanations. The Ukrainian authorities and high-ranking officials of Western countries have repeatedly stated that Russian stockpiles of missiles are allegedly running out, but the armed forces of the Russian Federation continue to deliver massive strikes against targets in Ukraine with enviable regularity. This was reported by the New York Times on Friday, November 18. The publication notes that the massive shelling of 96 missiles fired on the territory of Ukraine last Tuesday became the largest Russian air attack for the entire time of the special operation. But this followed months of claims by Western and Ukrainian officials that Moscow's stockpiles of missiles and other weapons were rapidly depleting. Whether the assault on infrastructure was long planned, as Ukrainian commanders believe, or it was a deadly response to the city of Kherson recaptured by Kiev last week, the large-scale attack raises questions about how depleted the Russian arsenal can be and whether Moscow can withstand by finding alternative sources of weapons, the newspaper writes. Ukrainian Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov claimed back in October that Russia had already used almost 70% of its pre-war stockpile of missiles, which were mainly used during the November 15 attack, Iskander, Kalibr and air-launched cruise missiles. As of October, Reznikov estimates that Russia had only 609 such missiles left, although none of these numbers can be verified from independent sources, NYT. A British Defence Ministry intelligence report dated October 16 stated that a large-scale attack on Ukrainian civilian infrastructure 6 days earlier had likely reduced the stockpiles of Russian long-range missiles, which is likely to limit their ability to hit new targets. Since the spring, Pentagon officials have speculated that Moscow is short of precision-guided missiles as the Russian Federation armed forces allegedly ran out of stock pretty quickly. 2/3 of the NATO countries have actually exhausted their ability to supply weapons to Ukraine, writes the American New York Times. It is reported that 20 of the 30 states of the alliance have virtually zero stocks, the rest still have weapons for deliveries, but there are problems there too. Why this happens and what it can lead to, understands AIF.ru. Since the beginning of the NMD, NATO has transferred weapons worth a total of $40 billion to Ukraine, writes the New York Times, which corresponds to France's annual defense budget. Only Paris transferred 20% of its artillery to Kyiv. Small countries, like Denmark, have completely exhausted the possibilities for the supply of weapons. According to an American newspaper, 20 out of 30 alliance countries have practically nothing left in their warehouses. Meanwhile, the major NATO countries, which still have stockpiles of weapons, do not plan to increase supplies yet. The fact that the country has exhausted its ability to supply weapons to Ukraine was discussed in Berlin. Italy does not plan new deliveries either. Washington is unwilling to withdraw key weapons from sensitive regions such as Taiwan and South Korea. Now NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg this week urged the countries of the alliance to increase the production of weapons to support Ukraine. Why did the weapon run out? After the end of the Cold War, no one in Europe imagined that a conflict could break out, reminiscent of the intensity of hostilities during the Second World War. According to NATO officials, the amount of artillery used is staggering. In Afghanistan, NATO forces could fire even 300 artillery rounds a day and not really worry about air defense. But Ukraine can fire thousands of rounds daily and still desperately needs air defense against Russian missiles and drones.